Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Friday, June 27th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are Real Clear Politics co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. Well, gentlemen, the Supreme Court delivered what the White House has called a giant win for President Trump this morning. It's a 6-3 decision written by Amy Coney Barrett, limiting the ability of federal courts to issue nationwide injunctions that block the president's executive orders. Here's a little bit of what President Trump said about it this morning.
Well, this was a big one, wasn't it? This was a big decision. Amazing decision, one that we're very happy about. This morning, the Supreme Court has delivered a monumental victory for the Constitution, the separation of powers, and the rule of law. And really, it's been an amazing period of time this last hour.
So, Tom, that's the president. He thinks it's a big deal. Is it a big deal? And what do you make of it?
I think it is a big deal. We've talked a lot about the nationwide injunctions and how that's sort of a modern phenomenon that has really picked up pace, in particular during the Donald Trump era, as plaintiffs have gone around and sort of judge shopped and found, found favorable judges and courts that are willing to basically stop his agenda. And this one is, it's on the birthright citizenship issue, his executive order. They didn't get to that question exactly. That's still an open question about the constitutionality of that. But in terms of these judges, it was a fairly decisive case. And you can tell how big of a deal it is by the way people react to it. And certainly if you look on the right and the left, and on the left in particular, where you see the way some of the folks on the left are reacting to this decision, they've lost their minds. I mean, they just, this is the end of democracy, the end of the Constitution, F-bombs being dropped all over the place. And I mean, it's a little overwrought, but it does tell you that this is a big monumental decision.
Yeah. Carl, what do you think?
Well, when you call a guy Hitler for 9 years, you've kind of run out of adjectives. So I guess, they're trying to express themselves. It was a big decision, but it doesn't, there are two things here, Andy and Tom. As Tom said, we've talked about it. The first is, do local district court judges have the right basically to make law for the whole country? Supreme Court said no. And that's a nice corrective in the system. But in terms of birthright citizenship, I still think it's an uphill battle that will end up at the Supreme Court. And this decision was what, 6-3. I still don't think they'll prevail on the merits of the president's position. So it may be temporary, but I don't begrudge Donald Trump for being pleased. Conservatives were happy with another case, the Montgomery County case, Andy, that you and I have followed, in which there's LGBT plus
QIA plus.
No, I don't want to make fun of it. Let's just say LGBT. Let's just leave that themed storybooks, and also other themes, about transgender and other sexualized themes in the curriculum for students, as young as elementary school age. And the parents, it was pretty radical stuff, and some of the parents wanted to opt out. Some Christian parents, some Muslim parents. The named plaintiff is a Muslim. And the Supreme Court decided, with Justice Alito writing the opinion, that Montgomery County, and this was predictable, but they went too far. So conservatives are pleased about that too. Trump was just generally pleased. You guys, I watched his press conference. It's he went out there just to say this, to crow about the decision on the executive orders, but then just stayed there and said something, and then he was just off and running. It was like campaign time again. He says, should we continue this? And some of the reporters, yeah. And he just started taking questions and talking about everything he could think of. He said, Joe Biden wouldn't do this. Joe Biden would take half a question and not answer and disappear. Here I am. He said,
it's the weave.
He said, my favorite thing, and I don't even know what brought this up, he seemed apropos of nothing, but that being president is the most dangerous job. It's more dangerous than being a race car driver. He said something, 1/10 of 1% of race car drivers die, 1/10 of 1% of bull riders and the rodeo died. I'm sure he was making those statistics up, but they said, but many more presidents die. And, you think about
Maybe
it. A
maybe it
lot
has to do.
4 of them have been assassinated. A couple have died, and 2 others have died in office. 2 or 3 others have been shot and wounded. So you can't really argue with this point, but it just seemed like a funny thing to say. He also went off on that whole thing about California. There was a valve in California shipping millions of tons of water out to sea for environmental reasons that could have been used to fight firefighters. It's just complete fiction. But he was feeling, he was in full Trump. He was feeling.
Well, he said he's had a good week, Carl.
Yeah,
I think you'd have to say, and I do think, Tom, one of the interesting things about this, just to go back to the Supreme Court ruling, this birthright citizenship, my understanding is what the court did was they combined 3 different cases, the Massachusetts, Maryland, and Washington, and what they ruled was that these judges are limited to their specific jurisdictions. So it really, I'm not a legal scholar, but it seems like it's not really about birthright citizenship per se. It's just
Correct.
about this procedural question. But it opens the door, I guess, to there being different interpretations in every jurisdiction to something that you think would be a national issue or that would eventually come to the Supreme Court, like birthright citizenship. But it looks like for at least a while here, we may end up with different interpretations of these laws at the state or jurisdictional level, at least until the Supreme Court then eventually decides. And that could take months, years, who knows how long, right?
Right. And that was the argument that the Trump administration was making, is that, you have to deal, these local district courts have to deal with the cases that come before them. They can't, and they rule on the sort of individual merits of each case. They can't take a case that comes before them and then sort of carte blanche, issue an injunction that applies nationwide. I mean, that seemed crazy. And I think the Supreme Court agreed with that notion. And so there will still be able to be these cases brought in local jurisdictions, but they will apply only to those cases, only in those jurisdictions. And so, again, I think that's probably a good thing for the system overall, because we don't want local courts making, usurping and making laws, usurping the president's agenda and sort of making nationwide laws from the bench. So
Yeah,
I think
but-
in that
but-
sense, it was.
But to Andy's point, you're going to have all these cases are going to be appealed. You could have different appellate courts making different decisions. I mean, it's going to be confusing and a hodgepodge of law until I guess each and every one of these cases goes to the Supreme Court or the Supreme Court refuses to hear it, right, Andy? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I guess that's what's going to happen.
That's
but hey,
how the
guys, I
system
wanted
should work, right,
Yeah,
Carl?
right. I want to talk about New York City. We've talked about it a lot this week, but the fallout just continues. Tom, on the front page of Real Clear Politics today, there was, again, 3 or 4 articles about it. This is because, as everyone knows, last Tuesday, this 33-year-old Democratic socialist, Zoran Mamdani, apparently won the Democratic primary. Here's what Bernie Sanders said. He thinks the lessons are, this is on the front page of Real Clear Politics today. He says, the Democrats should, quote, have the courage to address the real economic and moral issues that face the majority of our people, take on the greed and power of the oligarchy, and fight for an agenda that can improve life for working families. So, Tom, he goes on to say, we are going forward. No one is going to stop us. Sound advice for Democrats?
Look, we also have a piece on the front page of Real Clear Politics this morning from William J. Daley, Bill Daley, former Mayor Daley's brother, who says this is a wake-up call for the Democrats, and are they going to answer the call? And that, if you look at the Democratic Socialist platform, it includes defunding the police and all these sort of radical left-wing policies that are going to make Democrats a minority party if this becomes the national standard. And Mamdani was on TV just yesterday, the morning after his win, saying that, he was asked the question, is this, do you think this platform, do you think, your policies could work? And he said, of course, not just in, the big cities in America, but all across America. And that's, I think, what worries Democrats and what Republicans are trying to exploit is hanging this guy and his policies on the party nationally. And because I think he has proposed And one of the things that came out, and as he's getting more scrutiny, and we've talked about some of the other things he's proposed, but he's proposed taxing the whiter neighborhoods of New York at a higher rate than the, black and brown neighborhoods of New York, which is ironic since most, his victory was powered by mostly white people. But that kind of thing, in addition to being unconstitutional and probably racist, that's the kind of thing that I don't think Democrats want to support that. I don't think they want to be Democrats in Arizona and Georgia in these swing districts want to be out there fielding questions and trying to defend those kinds of policies.
Carl?
Well, there's a movement in New York in certain quarters. Bill Ackman, who's billionaire, I guess he's an oligarch, but like J.B. Pritzker and Alex Soros, so there are Democratic oligarchs. But he said, this is a wake up call, and the field needs to clear. Andrew Cuomo needs to step aside. Eric Adams needs to step aside. We need to find a candidate and field a candidate, run a writing candidate or an independent candidate in autumn to beat him. Meanwhile, Eric Adams, who didn't sound like he wanted to step aside, held a rally, and other people called for people to get behind him. And I've been talking about this for a few weeks. I could be all wet on this. As I said yesterday, I'm a New York City Democrats have an 8-1 registration advantage. So maybe Mamdani is basically the mayor in waiting, but he didn't do well in black neighborhoods. Andrew Cuomo did much better. And if Cuomo stands aside, I think a lot of the support would go to Adams. And if Adams could get out of his own way and get to a critical mass, then you might have a 2-person race that's these themes that Tom's talking about could come to the fore, because you would have a referendum on that. Adams is running as independent, but he's a lifelong Democrat, and you'd be a fight for the soul of the Democratic Party, at least in New York City.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the interesting things about this is that, it wasn't the working class that came out and voted for him. He did very well in sort of the Lower East Side, Brooklyn, Queens, these sort of, basically gentrifying neighborhoods. And Joel Kotkin had a piece, it's in Spiked, but it's on the front page of RealClearPolitics today. And he had a great line. He said, the New York these young people have inherited, so the new New Yorkers, is no longer the epicenter of economic opportunity. It flourishes largely as a hub for trustafarians, top-tier professionals, globe-trotting elites, and cultural creators. And that really is the base that Mamdani appealed to, and that's the wing of the Democratic Party that seems to be on the rise, Carl. At least that's what it looks.
Well, that's right. Yeah, and Tom's confident that if this catches on, if the Brandon Johnsons and Zohan Mamdani's become the face of the party, they'll lose national elections. I mean, but there's a caveat there, unless they win them. And then if they win them, America becomes a socialist country. I don't think that's where a majority of Americans are yet. But the young people, poll after poll has shown millennials and Gen Zs have much dimmer views of free market capitalism than any other cohort in any other generation that's ever existed. And the word socialism doesn't scare them. You'd think the experience in Venezuela would show them something, but that doesn't. When they think socialist, they think Bernie, they think Larry David, maybe, or if they don't know Bernie, they think of AOC. It doesn't have the stigma. So I think I think this is a flex point for the Democratic Party and maybe the country.
Tom, see it that way?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's shaping up to be that way. I mean, you look at the way this singular election has really exposed the schism in the Democratic Party. I mean, you've got sort of some of the bright lights, AOC, Bernie, the folks who are exciting the left wing. They are fully on board with Mamdani. They want all of these policies. They don't, they want to tax New Yorkers to supply all of the things that we've talked about, free bus rides and universal pre-K and all these things. And then you've got the establishment, Democrats basically saying, if we do this is a suicide pact. This is a suicide mission that we're on, and our party is going to be left in rubble. And so we'll see how it works out. But it is interesting how I think this election, the singular primary in New York, has exposed, to Carl's point, this real divide in the party. And has implications, I think, nationally and certainly for 2026 and 2028.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom, but don't go away. We'll be back with more right after these words. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Carl and Tom. And Tom, we've got this new statistical analysis from the Pew Research Center about the 2024 presidential race. We do like numbers at RCP. So what can we learn from this new Pew study? One thing I saw was that the Trump coalition was ethnically diverse, Hispanic voters. He got 51% for Harris, 48% for Trump. Trump got 15% of the black vote, which is up from 8% in 2020. So a pretty, pretty important demographic shift going on in terms of who voted for Trump this time around as opposed to 4 years ago.
Yeah, and this is an important study because Pew goes back. This is their validated voter survey. So they go back after the election and they recontact people who voted. So this is not like exit polls where people are coming out of the polls and you ask them, hey, who'd you vote for and what do you think of this? This is actual data that has been verified and validated by Pew. And so for that reason, you can look at it, I think, with a pretty high degree of certainty and in terms of what it shows you, the trends. And obviously, the ones you mentioned jump out, right? 51-48 among Hispanic voters. Those are catastrophic numbers for Democrats. And you break those down. Hispanics with college degrees, Republicans, Trump gained 26 points. Hispanic men, 20 points. Hispanic Catholics, 18 points. I mean, just down the list. And Asian voters, black men, naturalized citizens, even the younger vote. And we talked about that a lot. Republicans gained 17 points in the 30 to 39 age demographic. Jewish voters, 15 points. White Catholics, 15 points. I mean, it was a total and complete shift across the board in favor of Donald Trump. And that's why I think you've seen, and we saw this, happening during the campaign, but, obviously it's like fog of war. You can't, you've got conflicting information, you've got partisans that are spinning it. And now that all of that stuff has sort of been stripped away and you look at these numbers, all of those things were very, very real. Donald Trump was reaching new voters. The number of voters that did not vote in 2020 came out. It was a 17-point swing in Trump's favor. Republicans won those voters by 12 votes. So you can see he was reaching people who not only were voters that traditionally voted for Democrat and moved them into his direction. He was pulling new people, the people who didn't vote in 2020, brought them to the polls as well and won those folks by double digits. So pretty overwhelming, across the board shift in favor of Donald Trump.
Yeah. Carl, one other thing, he doubled his margin among voters without four-year degrees, 56 to 42%, whereas Harris won college-educated voters by 57 to 41%. So you've got an educational divide, you've got a rural-urban divide, you've got a religious attendance divide. I mean, there is this split in the country that not just among ethnic lines, but along other lines as well.
Yeah, that's right. But I would turn it around a little bit and say, this is bad news for the Democrats, Tom said, but it's good news for the Republican Party. It gives them a chance. Can they solidify these gains after Donald Trump leaves the scene? Because what you have is elites are voting for the Democrats, and they still are, but working class people of all, working class Anglos and Hispanics are voting for the Republicans. It wasn't too many years ago that I was warning, and Sean Trendy and I were writing about this, that the hope during the Obama years, the Democrats, that they had built a coalition and that black voters and that Hispanic voters and Asian voters were going to start voting like African American voters. And I wrote at the time, if that happens with Latinos, that's going to be the Republican Party is going to go the way of the Whigs. So, the other way to look at this is the Republican Party has righted its ship. It's not just a white party anymore. It's a party of working class people and rural people across the board. And that what motivates their base are class issues and economic issues, not some of these culture war issues. So I think, but the two parties are still, this was a close election. I keep telling people, you had all of these shifts in the electorate. What did it mean? Donald Trump won by 1.5 or 2 points. He didn't get a majority of the vote. He got a plurality of the vote, almost a majority. But we're still in a very close election. The Republicans have proven they can compete at places down, the Texas border where they couldn't compete before. But it doesn't mean the Democrats are going away, and we shouldn't overinterpret that.
All right. Well, one thing we do have to interpret is because it's Friday.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious.
Tom, I don't even have to introduce this segment anymore. People know it's coming. What do you can't be serious about this week?
Well, normally, the last couple times I've used my "you cannot be serious" nominee to sort of highlight the silliness on the Democratic side. But this week I'm going with Rep. Andy Ogles from Tennessee, who earlier this week wrote a letter to the Justice Department saying that he would like Pam Bondi to investigate and begin denaturalization proceedings against the aforementioned Zohran Mamdani, and have him deported because apparently in a rap song that he sung, he said something favorable about a group that's been a designated terror group, and apparently there's a clause in the law that if you give sympathy to terror groups or something within 5 years of you becoming a U.S. citizen, that they can be revoked or whatever. And he said in his tweet, he called him Zohran Little Muhammad Mandami, which I think sort of gives away the game. I mean, that's sort of an unnecessary slur, targeting this guy. And so A, it's stupid, I think, and unnecessary. And B, I think it's bad politics. I mean, if you're a Republican, you're going to turn this guy into a martyr? I mean, that makes no sense at all. In many cases, it'll be better for the Republican Party if he wins as mayor of New York and the place goes to crap. And then, it'll be Republicans can say, I told you so. So this makes no sense on a number of levels. And so Rep. Andy Ogles, Republican from Tennessee, you cannot be serious.
Carl, what do you got?
Well, on the other side of the aisle in the same chamber, a Democrat named Mark Pocan, who's a Wisconsin progressive. I think Madison is in his district. He posted a nasty gram on social media. He said that Deputy White House Chief of Staff Stephen Miller should go back to 1930s Germany. Now think about that for a minute. First of all, it injects the element of time travel into your slur, which is a new one. But Miller is Jewish, so it's just all the more distasteful. And this nasty, this Hitler stuff, you'd think the Democrats had learned their lesson by losing the last election after they ran on that. But Mark Pocan, he did not learn a lesson, so he cannot be serious.
All right. Well, mine is the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, which in the wake of this weekend strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, put out this social media post. They said, "Our hearts go out to the victims and families impacted by the recent bombings in Iran. While this tragic event occurred overseas, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department is closely monitoring the situation alongside our local, state, and federal partners." So if you were wondering what the Sheriff's Department is up to out there, it's not handling illegals, not riots. It's monitoring what a bombing overseas means and expressing their sympathy for the victims. They did put out an apology, and they are apparently looking into how this tweet ever appeared on their social media page, but it wasn't a hack. But LA Sheriff's Department, you cannot be serious. So we're going to take a break now. Stick around because Carl and I will be talking with pollster Spencer Kimball about new data about who is leading the Democratic field in 2028. And it's not a certain California governor. I'll give that away. But don't go away. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics, with Andy Walworth, who normally is moderator. I'm going to handle this segment today. I'm going to make Andy give some of his opinions. We've got Spencer Kimball, the excellent pollster. He's director of Pollster for Emerson College, professor there. He also does polling for Real Clear Opinion Research. Hey, thanks for joining us.
Carl, thanks for having me.
All right. So look, your poll, you got a new poll out today. It made news. I want to talk about the news. But then Andy wants to delve into the polling you did in New York, because that turned out to be very prescient. But let's start with Donald Trump. The honeymoon's over, according to you, according to your data. The headline in the Hill said he's underwater. That's not quite right. He's 1 point, job approval, disapproval rating, it's nearly even, but he's 1 point to the bad. But you know, we could say that's even like a statistical dead heat, but it's not where he's been. You had him earlier at 49% approval rating, only 41% disapproval rating. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way you have to look at it, not as a one-shot case study, but as a longitudinal study. And so if we go back to January, he was up at 49. Now he's down at 45. His disapproval number keeps ticking up. You know, our numbers generally don't swing wildly. You don't see 12 points 1 month and 5 points another. We just find that public opinion's a little bit more static these days than maybe in the past. So we have seen, though, that trend exist where the favorability is dropping a half point, a point, while the or increasing the unfavorables. So we'll see what happens over time, but the bottom has not dropped out with Trump. His base is still very firmly right in there. 44-45% approval is where he's generally at. So
well, that's
we'll
where
see
he
if
was
that
for most of
drops.
his first term, right? I mean, he's there. He has a ceiling, but he also has a floor, doesn't he?
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
think people have to realize that depending on how these other events, you know, react. Remember 3-4 months ago with the stock market and how quickly polls were shifting back and forth around the 100 days. Well, the stock market's a lot different today. And, you know, we've seen some polling coming back to those numbers. Ours has stayed relatively consistent, though, slightly trending in the negative direction.
Now, your survey probably can't account, though, if he's going to get a bump over what anything that's going on in Iran. That's not going to show up in these numbers.
No, not yet.
Do you think? All right, educate. Now we're going to go from the data to guesswork because you follow politics as closely as me and Andy Spencer. Do you think he's going to get a bump from what's happened in Iran? I mean, we dropped those bombs. He then declared a ceasefire. He's trying to broker a peace deal. What's your gut feeling? What's your gut tell you?
Well, we asked that question in this national poll about if people think there's going to be peace between Iran and Israel, or is they're going to go back to war. And they're really split about it. About a third think there'll be peace, and a third think they'll be back at war, and a third is unsure. So I think it's really up in the air, and that's what Trump has done. He's created this new conversation, and I'm not sure where it's going to end up. You know, the pollster can kind of see it percolating, but then we're going to see it, you know, come to a boil. And if there is peace in the Middle East, yeah, Trump is going to win a Nobel Peace Prize, and that's going to bump his ratings. If we start seeing a nuclear bomb drop, then that's going to drop his ratings. So we're right in that period where it's all kind of happening, but it hasn't boiled.
And
go ahead, Andy.
Spencer, I'm curious about something else that was in this new poll, and that's you looked at the presidential nomination or who's ahead, Democrats and Republicans for 2028. And I was sort of surprised. Pete Buttigieg leads, although he's being beaten by none of the above, or I guess undecided at this point, right? On the Democratic side. And on the Republican side, it looks like Vice President Vance is really a solid leader, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Vice President Vance is right now the heir apparent for the Republicans. We'll see again how that plays out, but he's hovering right around 50%. And his biggest opponent would be Rubio and DeSantis out of Florida at 12 and 9. So he's in a good spot, but we'll see how that plays over the next 2-3 years. On the Democratic side, the big news was Harris dropping really out that lead spot. She was hovering around, you know, the high 30s, low 40s nationally. Now she's in the low teens. Her base of support has really come back to minority women, older, so really core. She's lost some of that expanded base with younger voters. And now it looks like the Democratic field is fairly wide open, and we'll see who emerges as alternatives.
And Carl, are you surprised your governor out there in California, he's only at 7%. He didn't pick up those Harris votes, and he's led by Buttigieg and a couple other people, right? What happened?
Spencer, Andy's trying to bait me into saying something bad about you as a pollster. I won't do it, but are you sure that you've got all of Gavin's support there?
He's in second, third place.
Seemed low to me.
He's at 11%. He's right in the conversation. He's part of that pack. But like on the Republican side, it's going to be Vance. He's so far ahead that we're seeing the Democrat. They're going to have to fight that out. And yeah, Newsom could come away with it, but he's going to have to battle now with 4 or 5 other horses.
You're listening to Spencer Kimball, Director of Polling for Emerson College. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief. You're listening to us on Sirius XM Radio. I'm with Andy Walworth. Or maybe you're watching on our podcast. We put it on our site every night. Spencer, the other thing about your poll, and I want to leave some time for Andy to talk about the New York data with you, but the right track, wrong track numbers are trending in in a negative direction.
Yeah, slightly.
Okay.
What
What accounts for that?
I think just some of the anxiety of new policies up in the air. Remember, the tariff policy was a new discussion. The Middle East policy here is a new discussion. People have anxiety when new ideas are floated out there. But over time, they digest these ideas, and we're going to see how they react to them. We'll see it at the ballot box, obviously, in November. But that's what, and we'll capture it a little bit in the polling to see what opinions. But the polls do change as circumstances change, and that's what we're trying to track and reflect.
All right, Andy, New York.
Well, yeah. So, Spencer, we watched this New York race very carefully, and we talked about one of your polls early before the election, where you had Mamdani winning, I think, in the 8th or the 10th round of voting on this ranked choice system that they're using up there. And I had a sort of just a procedural question, which is, how do you poll for a ranked choice election like this? And is it more difficult than polling a straight up horse race? I mean, how confident are you in those numbers? Because it would seem to me that you would sort of have a compounding effect on the margin of error. I mean, every time you do a round, doesn't it get more difficult to sort of, predict?
Well, remember, Andy, we're from Boston. We don't do things because they're easy. We do them because they're hard. And so as we take a look, we had a chance in 21 to test it out. Now, remember, not every pollster jumped in the field here in New York City because of that challenge. Ranked choice voting presents a challenge because it's a different way of voting. You got to remember, people don't really know how to vote. So they come in, they're ranking everybody in one column, which means that their vote might be thrown out, or they're skipping columns, which means that some votes aren't going to be counted because they didn't follow procedural rules. With that said, what we found in 2021 and in this cycle is that there was a pretty consistent pattern to the voting. And if you ask the question the right way, where I think it's easier to ask them 5 individual questions as opposed to give them the straight up ballot test on their screen. So different ways to administer the survey. Remember, in a live operator would be different than a text message. But with all of that said, our polling was able to show that big movement for Mamdani over the course of 4 or 5 months, and was able to capture it on Tuesday night.
Well,
yeah, but just from a statistic.
Well, wait, let's make that point. Let me underscore that point. Spencer's being modest. We looked smart on our show talking about the Mamdani before he won, when Andrew Cuomo was still supposedly the favorite, because of your polling, Spencer. You saw it coming, and we were prepared. And however you did it right.
Yeah. So I don't want to walk out too much, but does it affect the margin of error when you're doing this kind of ranked choice voting? Does the margin of error go up?
It does, because more people are dropping out of the polls. So we started with 830 people, and then you end up with 700 people because they're not all going to be counted in that final round of voting. So that margin of error does increase. But what we're always looking for is that trend. And what we're looking, we're going to just tell you, hey, this is going to be a close election. A lot of folks thought, Cuomo was going to walk away with this by 9:30. It was the other way around, actually. And so that's what the polling was showing us. Not just the last poll, but the poll before that poll, where we had it at 9 points. That was what was considered an outlier. But we could see the people that said that they were definitely going to vote. It was actually 52-48. And I'm like, wow, there's a lot of enthusiasm for Mamdani. And then we obviously saw that play out on Tuesday.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Carl?
Yeah, well, and I guess the next thing you got to poll up there and determine whether Eric Adams is now going to come up from the ashes. He was sort of left for dead, but he's decided he wants to run a vigorous campaign. The Republican nominee, the founder of the Guardian Angels, will he drop out? Will Andrew Cuomo run as an independent? Once this field shakes out, I guess you'll be doing polling up there to see if Mamdani, Democrats have an 8-1 advantage in that state, but in that city. But maybe there's some, factors there that will bring Adams back, and you'll be polling about that, I assume.
Oh, yeah, starting probably in the fall, though people have already asked us, to begin, but we haven't even finished counting the votes from the primary. They haven't gone through that ranked choice until next week. So we'll let people go on summer vacation and then we'll come back. But yeah, you have a lot of interesting dynamics shaping up in this race. Eric Adams, who's very unpopular, but is the incumbent mayor. He might be, a little bit more popular for some voters when you look at him against Mamdani, but then Cuomo polls from the same vote as Adams. So to me, if the two of them are running, that's going to create a path for Mamdani, unless the Republican Sliwa drops out, and that opens up more, moderate conservative path. So a lot of moving parts that we'll see how it all, shakes out over the summer.
And that won't be a ranked choice election, just for people know. That's a good
Plurality can win
old-fashioned
that.
plurality wins, right?
All right.
And that could help Cuomo.
Yeah.
Thank you, Spencer Kimball.
Thank you.
Well, that'll do it for us. You've been listening to Spencer Kimball, Director of Polling at Emerson College. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for RealClearPolitics with Andy Walworth. And after the break, we'll have Susan Crabtree on to talk about her latest story. Don't go away.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm here with Susan Crabtree. She is national political correspondent for RCP and the author of the new book on California politics, Fool's Gold: The Radicals, Con Artists, and Traitors Who Killed the California Dream and Now Threaten Us All. So, Susan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me again.
You've got a piece that came out this week in RCP. It's not about California. It's about Iran. And it's about a topic that really hasn't gotten the kind of coverage I think it deserves. And that is the fact that Iran has detained and is holding a number of foreign nationals in its jails, including some Americans. Tell us about that and why'd you write about it this week?
Well, there are many as 6 Americans that we know about that are in this Iranian jail, this notorious Evin prison. And one of them, Shahab Dalili, he was left out of previous deals to get the hostages out during the Biden administration. And his family was very vocal during that time and saying, what was going on here? Why aren't you telling Iran all or nothing? Because they did get 5 Americans out, and the State Department at the time under Joe Biden made a very big deal about that. But meanwhile, these families were saying, you did not get Dalili out, you did not get another American. Now, these are legal permanent residents, so they're not citizens, but under the current law, hostage law in America, they have all the privileges that American citizens would have.
So these are held in Tehran in this prison that you mentioned, which is called the Evin prison, I guess, EVAN. And that was struck by the Israelis on Monday. It was sort of at the tail end of the military exchange after we had hit the nuclear sites. But they went in and they struck the prison where, I suppose, these Americans and other foreign nationals, as well as domestic political prisoners, are being held. So that sort of is what gave the story real juice.
Right. But they didn't strike it where they were being held. That's the problem. They struck the gate, the front gate. And from what I understand, we don't know because no one's talking about this, including the State Department, including the White House, which I did reach out to. That was supposed to be a symbolic message to the Iranian people because this prison, Evin prison, is known for holding political prisoners. In fact, they did execute an American last year. And I talked to the lawyer that represents both that American and he's a legal permanent resident, a green card holder, and this other American, Shahab Dalili, and I spoke to their families, and they were very concerned that was irresponsible of Israel to hit that prison because it's such a emotional time, and of course, precarious time for these prisoners. They've been holding out there for years in this prison, and then Israel hits the front gate. And what kind of reaction will that provoke? The families are on pins and needles right now, waiting to see if the ceasefire holds, and they're advocating to both President Trump and the State Department, Marco Rubio, to include their families' release the family members' release in any type of nuclear deal moving forward.
Yeah, and has the White House responded on that? That would seem to be something that you would want at the forefront of the negotiation at this point, right?
Not on the specifics. When I talked to the White House, they gave me a statement saying, we have had a great record. We have gotten more than 50 hostages worldwide out from their release. They have secured the release of over the course of 2 terms. This is in the second term. The first term, they were very good, and then their hostage diplomacy was very effective. Of course, so far in the Trump's term, they have been focused on the hostages held by Hamas. And as you know, that has been the major focus of many countries, Israel and others, trying to get those hostages released. Unfortunately, some of them have just been released, their remains, and because they died while they were being held. This is a very sad sort of situation here, but there's chance right now when these pivotal moments happen that you could secure the release of the remaining Americans. And there are also Westerners. There was a letter I got from a family to the Swedish Prime Minister advocating for the same thing. There's UK hostages there. There's many from several Western countries. So this is a pivotal moment, and the attorneys, the human rights attorneys, are trying their best to say, I don't understand why you had to bomb the front of the prison. And there were reports that some of these hostages had to be moved because other parts, unconfirmed reports of the prison was bombed. And so their conditions may even be worsening right now. And that's the concern on the families' minds and on their attorneys' minds.
Yeah. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm talking to Susan Crabtree. We're talking about the situation in Iran and the prisoners held there specifically in this one prison in Tehran, which was bombed by the Israelis, as we said, but holds foreign nationals as well as domestic political prisoners. And this, of course, has a lot of, is freighted with a lot of historical meaning because, as people know, Iran took American hostages back in 1979 when during the Iranian Revolution. And it has been a feature of their sort of foreign policy ever since, as true in other repressive regimes. They do sort of grab these foreign nationals, take them, and then trade them for money or for, other, prisoner exchanges where they get often multiple of their own people back in exchange for this. So this is a feature of Iranian foreign policy, and I guess that's part of what, if you're the U.S. government, I guess you'd sort of want to try to change that as well, right?
Yes, this is sort of something that the Iranians have perfected over time. It's become a business for them. I've covered many of these cases. I'm in touch with human rights lawyers, even the Washington Post. Jason Rezaian, who was released during the Obama administration. Of course, the big news about that hostage release after everyone was celebrating was that President Obama sent pallets of cash to Iran, 400 million the night of those hostages release. Even though the human rights lawyers want to see these family members return home, many of them do not agree with providing a monetary exchange. It should be in return from some policy agreement, maybe a nuclear agreement. But this now process that we've gone now, Biden increased the amount that he provided for the hostages that he secured their release. It was 7 times that of what the Obama administration provided, and that number was 1.7 billion. Now we're up to 8-9 billion from the Biden administration. So they don't want to see that keep happening because it only provides more incentive to grab more Americans. And this particular American was an Iranian citizen who had immigrated to the United States, was living in California. He went to the UAE. He didn't even go back to Iran. He was nabbed by the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, in a separate country Arabic country. So that was deeply concerning too, and it broke every type of Geneva Convention, international rule governing hostages. So they are trying to secure his release, Shahab Dalili's release. He's 63 years old. His family hasn't seen him in many, many years, over a decade. And so this is a pivotal time. They're hoping that they can use this moment to urge the Trump administration, if there is any kind of nuclear deal moving forward, that Shahab Dalili and other Americans can see their freedom as well.
Yeah, and one feature of this, I guess, it's worth mentioning, is how often they grab journalists, including, as you say in this article, which I think people can find it on Real Clear Politics. In January 2024, his name is Reza Valizadeh. I think I've got that right. He's a dual U.S. Iranian citizen and was a former journalist for the U.S. Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, for Radio Farda. Charged him with 10 years in prison for espionage, and he's being held as we speak. He's another example of someone that they've grabbed and I guess will hold until they get something, money or something in exchange, right?
That's exactly right. And they really tend to target dual citizens the most. And when they go back for a father's funeral, a family member's funeral, and that's when they get nabbed. In other cases, I've covered instances where they're State Department contractors, people working for the U.S. State Department, go over there on invitation by the Iranian government for conferences, and they get nabbed going back on their way to the airport. This is not normal diplomatic actions. This is a violation of so many rules, international norms and rules. So, these people are trying to secure their release. They've been in this terrible prison where they are psychologically tortured, forced to make confessions of spying. And in most cases, these are trumped up charges that have no basis in reality.
Yeah. All right. Well, Susan, we're going to have to leave it there. We'll keep an eye on this story. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking to Susan Crabtree. She's the national correspondent for Real Clear Politics. And that's our program for today. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back next Monday. Have a great weekend.